Ever wondered what version you've actually been watching? Wondering if there are crucial scenes you've never seen? Wondering if the ending you remember is actually what was filmed, or if it was recut by distributors? Buckle up, because tonight we're diving into 12 Italian exploitation masterpieces, so extreme they were literally sliced to ribbons by horrified censors across the globe, each banned in multiple countries simultaneously. From the Amazon jungles to fascist palaces to concentration camp horrors, these films pushed cinema to its absolute limits. 1. Cannibal Holocaust, 1980. When Ruggero Deodato premiered this thing in Milan in February 1980, Italian authorities didn't mess around whatsoever. 10 days later, cops seized the print and arrested Deodato on serious charges of murder and making actual snuff films. They genuinely believed he'd killed actors on camera to achieve the exact level of realism that appears on screen. The found footage gimmick was that effective and convincing. It was so convincing that authorities thought they were dealing with an actual snuff film that documented real murders. An anthropology professor heads into the Amazon looking for a missing documentary crew that disappeared years earlier, but what he discovers is brutal exploitation footage showing the real savages aren't the natives, they're the filmmakers themselves. It's a bold social commentary wrapped in the most disgusting imagery possible. Deodato shot it like a genuine newsreel documentary, all grainy and chaotic, with a haunting Riz Ortolani score that makes the violence hit harder than you expect. The cinematography intentionally mimics real news footage. The plot twist where you realize the documentarians are actually worse than the people they filmed was revolutionary for exploitation cinema at the time. Deodato had to drag 4 terrified actors onto Italian television and prove they were alive and well to avoid spending his entire life in prison facing murder charges. The murder charges got dropped, but the obscenity and animal cruelty charges stuck permanently. Multiple countries banned it outright immediately upon hearing about it. The UK, Norway, Finland, Australia all said absolutely not. Some countries still can't release it uncut today. Shot on a tiny budget of around $100,000, which made the realism even more sickening and convincing to audiences. What absolutely destroyed censors worldwide was the documented real animal slaughter on screen. The crew actually killed animals during filming for real. A turtle getting disemboweled, an iguana getting decapitated. The film was eventually unbanned in Italy 4 years later after legal battles, and Deodato proving the actors were alive, but by then it had become completely legendary. It became this underground myth, whispered about in horror circles, a movie that crossed every single line imaginable and established the found footage format for decades to come. 2. Cannibal Ferox, 1981. Umberto Lenzi looked at Cannibal Holocaust and thought, why not just throw every disgusting thing at the wall and see what sticks without any moral framework whatsoever? Cannibal Ferox became the most banned movie in the entire world, according to Guinness World Records official documentation. Officially banned in 31 separate countries on record. The U.S. distributor literally advertised it as the most violent film ever made in theatrical posters designed to shock. 3 friends head into the Colombian Amazon to prove cannibalism is a myth based on academic theories and research. Their entire thesis proves completely wrong by the midpoint. But instead of any kind of moral commentary like Deodato attempted in Holocaust, Lenzi just piles on the brutality without restraint or purpose. Castration scenes that make you wince and look away involuntarily. Brain eating. Hooks through breasts and bodies in graphic detail. It's not subtle, it's not smart, it's just meat on a platter, presented for shock value. Giovanni Lombardo Radice plays a gangster named Mike, who's basically the worst human being imaginable, and his punishment administered by the natives is creative in ways you genuinely don't want to think about. The film was shot on grimy 16mm in actual jungle locations with practically no budget for safety precautions whatsoever. It looks cheap, it feels cheap, but that cheapness makes it worse somehow. The dubbing into English is hilariously bad, which should undercut the violence, but somehow doesn't work that way. Censors completely lost their minds everywhere they screened it. Britain put it on the video nasties list and didn't legally allow an uncut version until the year 2000. Australia followed suit immediately and kept it banned for years. Germany had to heavily censor it for decades with multiple versions. The film cost basically nothing to make but made serious money because people wanted to witness the most violent thing ever filmed. Lenzi himself said he just wanted to make quick cash on a trend. He succeeded beyond his expectations. 3. Salo, or the 120 Days of Sodom, 1975. Pier Paolo Pasolini made this as his final film before his mysterious death shortly after completion under controversial circumstances. It's based on the classic Marquis de Sade novel about extreme depravity, but relocated entirely to fascist Italy during the final days of World War II. 4 wealthy political figures kidnap a group of teenagers and hold them captive in an isolated palace, subjecting them to increasingly severe psychological and physical horrors beyond description. The violence isn't just graphic, it's methodical and deliberately paced to maximum effect. It's designed to destroy the audience emotionally as much as the victims on screen. Pasolini was already controversial for his independent films and his outspoken critique of Italian society, power structures, and the church. Salo pushed him into territory that seemed intentionally unfilmable and immoral by design. The sexual humiliation, the torture, the degradation, all tied directly to themes of fascism and authoritarian power. Authorities banned it in Italy almost immediately upon release without question. Released for exactly 1 week before getting yanked by officials who called it blasphemous and morally corrupting to society. Multiple countries refused to show it at all. When it finally got restored and properly re-released decades later, critics and filmmakers started reinterpreting it as a genuine philosophical condemnation of fascism and power dynamics. But watching it is still incredibly difficult and disturbing for audiences. Pasolini wasn't interested in making you feel comfortable or entertained. He wanted you to feel complicit in the cruelty being perpetrated on screen. The black and white cinematography makes it look even colder and more deliberate and calculated. What makes Salo different from purely exploitative films is the genuine artistic and political intent behind every frame deliberately. This wasn't made to sell tickets or grab headlines. It was made as a philosophical statement about evil and control and dehumanization under fascism. 4. The Beast in Heat, 1977. Paolo Solve's SS Hellcamp, also released internationally as The Beast in Heat, perfectly represents the Italian Nazi exploitation cycle that exploded in the mid to late 1970s across European markets with shocking ferocity. Macha Magal plays Dr. Ellen Kratch, an impossibly beautiful but completely evil Nazi scientist who runs a concentration camp where tortured prisoners are subjected to systematic abuse and humiliation beyond imagination. The title refers to an actual mutant creature the Nazis supposedly created through mad science experiments conducted on prisoners. The film doesn't just exploit the Holocaust. It combines sadism, sexual violence, and Nazi imagery into one grimy package designed specifically to provoke audiences. Censors absolutely hated this across every territory internationally. Britain banned it immediately and kept it banned through the entire video nasties panic of the 1980s without relenting. The US released it as SS Experiment Camp 2, but even that heavily edited version got harsh reactions from critics and morality groups everywhere. What made this cycle of films so offensive to authorities wasn't just the explicit content, but the gleeful way they wallowed in cruelty without artistic justification. There was no pretense of commentary or critique. It was pure exploitation using one of history's darkest chapters as a backdrop for entertainment and profit. Solvay and other directors in this cycle knew exactly what they were doing, commercially and morally. They were cashing in directly on taboos and historical trauma without apology. The film was shot cheaply in Europe with low-budget actors and minimal locations to keep production costs down. The dubbing into English added an extra layer of sleaziness and unreality to proceedings. Despite the bans, the film made decent money through bootleg VHS tapes and shady distribution deals. It influenced an entire wave of similar Italian films in the late 1970s. Most got pulled from shelves in the UK when they were branded Nazi nasties by authorities. 5. Deep Red, 1975. Dario Argento made Deep Red and basically invented the modern giallo film as critics and filmmakers understood it thereafter. A concert pianist witnesses a brutal murder and becomes entangled in a twisted mystery where he's chased relentlessly by a psychotic killer wearing distinctive black leather gloves. Argento's visual style was absolutely revolutionary and influenced an entire generation of horror filmmakers worldwide. Lurid colors that pop off screen, bizarre camera angles that disorient viewers, dizzying pans that made audiences feel unmoored and confused deliberately. The Goblin score is genuinely one of the best horror soundtracks ever composed in cinema history, bar none. The kills are creative and horrifying in equal measure. A woman's head gets smashed directly through a window in graphic fashion. Another victim gets her face held directly over an open fire. The violence is vivid and red, which became Argento's visual signature throughout his career. The film was massive internationally and influenced an entire generation of horror and slasher directors worldwide. John Carpenter has cited Argento's influence on Halloween repeatedly. Argento became known as the master of the thrill and the master of horror by critics everywhere. What made Deep Red different from pure exploitation trash was the technical brilliance on display. This wasn't made on a shoestring budget. It had a real budget and serious craft behind every single frame meticulously. The cinematography is genuinely gorgeous in a deeply disturbing way that shouldn't work but does. Colors pop magnificently off the screen while people are being murdered violently. Critics praised the visual style even when they were horrified by the content and graphic violence. Some countries censored it heavily for theatrical release. Italy had issues with certain sequences. The UK required substantial cuts before certification. But Deep Red wasn't explicitly banned outright because Argento brought an art house sensibility to the genre entirely. His giallo films walked a line between exploitation and legitimate cinema that gave them credibility that pure slashers couldn't achieve ever. The influence continues to this day. 6. Tenebrae, 1982. Argento's final giallo masterpiece follows an American writer in Rome who becomes the target of a serial killer, mimicking murders directly from his own published book. The killer phones the author before each murder to describe what they've done in graphic detail. It's psychological torture mixed with elaborate set-piece murders, choreographed like violence ballets. Tenebrae means darkness in Italian, and Argento bathes the whole film in stark white interiors and pools of blood-red blood that feel almost painterly. The violence is incredibly inventive throughout. A killer uses a piece of broken mirror to slowly slit someone's wrists in excruciating detail. Another scene involves a bizarre self-mutilation that's genuinely difficult to watch without turning away. But the craft behind every frame is undeniable and evident. The cinematography is pristine and composed. Every shot looks deliberately arranged. The kills are staged like brutal ballets with precise choreography. Argento's camera moves with precision and purpose throughout. The Goblin score is relentless and overwhelming. Censors had problems with the graphic violence in many territories. Some territories required cuts before theatrical release. But Tenebrae got a proper theatrical release in most countries because Argento was established and had credibility. That didn't stop protests, though. Critics called it misogynistic because the victims are mostly women. The film became a lightning rod for debates about whether artistic merit excused graphic violence. Tarantino has called it one of the greatest violent films ever made in cinema. The film cost significantly more than typical giallo films, reflecting Argento's elevated status. It made money worldwide despite the controversy generated. Tenebrae remains his most technically accomplished giallo work. 7. Anthropophagus, 1980. Joe D'Amato's film about a group of tourists on a remote island being hunted relentlessly by a cannibalistic lunatic is remembered primarily for one specific scene that still horrifies viewers decades later. The killer rips an unborn baby from a pregnant woman's womb and eats it on screen. That's the entire movie's reputation right there, distilled to one moment of extreme transgression. One scene that's so transgressive it overshadows everything else completely. D'Amato was known for pushing extreme content further than almost anyone else working in Italian exploitation. The gore is relentless throughout the entire runtime without mercy. The atmosphere is oppressively bleak and hopeless and miserable. D'Amato shot it like a genuine nightmare where nothing makes sense and everything is suffering and misery. The dialogue is incomprehensible thanks to terrible dubbing that adds unintentional comedy to some scenes. The acting is wooden and amateurish throughout the film. But the visceral impact is absolutely undeniable no matter what critics say. Censors completely rejected it everywhere they screened it. The UK banned it for decades without mercy or reconsideration. Germany had to heavily censor it for years before even considering release. Even countries known for leniency with horror films couldn't stomach it uncut. The fetus scene became legendary in underground horror circles immediately. People would seek it out specifically to witness that moment of extreme cinema. It's horror as endurance test pure and simple. The film has no plot to speak of, just suffering and death and degradation. D'Amato wasn't interested in narrative coherence whatsoever. He wanted raw, visceral impact above all else at any cost. The low budget shows throughout, but that actually works in the film's favor. Everything looks grimy and desperate and hopeless and real. When the film was finally released on home video in certain territories, it became a cult object immediately. Fans of extreme cinema consider it a rite of passage to completion. 8. The Last Cannibal World, 1977. Ruggero Deodato made this before Cannibal Holocaust, and it established the template for an entire genre of films. A white man is captured by natives and forced to undergo brutal rituals to join the tribe. It's structured like a genuine adventure film that slowly descends into absolute horror. Ivan Rasimov plays the protagonist, and he actually does believable work throughout. He goes from outsider to initiate to something else entirely. The journey is genuinely unsettling because the film treats it seriously. There's no winking at the camera or comedy relief. The cannibal sequences are played completely straight with brutal efficiency. Real animals were killed during production. Real indigenous people were filmed without consent or compensation. The line between documentary and fiction blurs constantly and purposefully. This is where the cannibal boom really started in Italian cinema. Umberto Lenzi's Man from Deep River from 1972 technically came first, but The Last Cannibal World is the film that inspired an entire decade of imitators. Deodato proved there was an audience for this material. Other directors took notice immediately. Studios greenlit cannibal films as quick cash-ins. The market exploded with dozens of entries. This film doesn't have Cannibal Holocaust's moral complexity or social commentary. It's more straightforward exploitation, but that actually makes it more insidious somehow. There's no attempt at critique. It's just observation of cruelty. Censors didn't like it, but it wasn't explicitly banned in most territories. That probably helped it make money. It was the gateway to cannibal cinema. Once audiences had seen it, they were desensitized enough for even worse entries. 9. Don't Torture a Duckling, 1972. Lucio Fulci made this giallo in rural southern Italy, and it's genuinely a masterpiece despite being brutally violent. A young man is accused of murdering children in his small village. The investigation reveals the real monsters aren't the accused, but the villagers themselves and their ignorance. Their superstition, racism, and class prejudice destroy innocent lives. The film uses a murder mystery framework to critique Italian society at its core. The violence is shocking, but it's in service of a genuine message. Fulci was making art house cinema that happened to contain graphic gore. The cinematography is genuinely beautiful, despite the dark subject matter. The colors of the Italian countryside are gorgeous against the ugliness of the story. The social commentary was ahead of its time entirely. The film doesn't hold back on depicting racism and class prejudice directly. Some territories banned it outright. Others required significant cuts. Italy had problems with certain sequences. Critics recognized the artistic merit, but censors focused solely on the brutal content. The title comes from a peasant saying about not torturing a duckling, meaning don't cause unnecessary suffering to the vulnerable. That's the entire theme. The film remains one of the greatest gialli ever made by any director. Tarantino has publicly praised it. Film scholars consider it essential Italian cinema. What makes it different from pure exploitation is the intelligence behind every scene. Fulci wasn't just trying to shock audiences. He was trying to say something meaningful about society. 10. Eaten Alive, 1980. Umberto Lenzi's cannibal film shows journalists and mercenaries searching desperately for a missing woman deep in the jungle. What they find is a remote community led by a maniacal religious preacher whose followers are kept in constant terror. The film has one scene that's impossible to forget, involving brutal degradation, filmed completely without any discretion whatsoever. Lenzi doesn't cut away. He shows everything in graphic detail. The exploitation is complete and relentless. The woman character goes through absolute hell. Rape, torture, humiliation, all presented with cold clinical detachment. Censors understandably freaked out everywhere. The film got banned in multiple territories immediately. Britain put it on the video nasties list. Australia didn't allow it for years. The US got a heavily censored version. Even dedicated horror fans acknowledge this is difficult viewing. There's no catharsis, no revenge, no justice, just suffering. That's the entire movie. Lenzi was experimenting with how far he could push audiences. This is exploitation cinema at its most extreme. The film has almost no redeeming qualities beyond its impact. It's not trying to be funny or clever, it's just trying to make you uncomfortable. Shot on a low budget with non-professional actors in genuine jungle locations, it has an authenticity that adds to the discomfort. The violence feels real because the conditions are real and dangerous. 11. The Night Porter, 1974. Liliana Cavani made this art house thriller about a former Nazi officer and a Holocaust survivor who reconnect years later in Vienna. Their reunion reignites a sadomasochistic relationship that mirrors their wartime relationship. The film is sophisticated and deeply troubling in complex ways. It treats Nazi imagery as erotic rather than purely historical. That's what made it so controversial everywhere. The Holocaust survivor character is complicit in her own degradation throughout. She actively participates in scenarios recreating her trauma. The film explores power dynamics and trauma in ways that are genuinely interesting, but deeply uncomfortable. Critics called it exploitative everywhere. Feminists protested it. Roger Ebert wrote that it was as nasty as it was provocative, but Cavani had serious artistic intent. She was examining how trauma bonds people, how power relationships form in broken minds. Italy banned it initially. Other countries debated it heavily. Some allowed it with warnings. Others censored it heavily. The film stars Dirk Bogarde as the officer and Charlotte Rampling as the survivor. Their performances are nuanced and unsettling. What's interesting is that The Night Porter gets defended as art cinema, while similar Italian exploitation films get dismissed. But both are exploring taboo subject matter. The difference is one has Criterion Collection credibility. The film remains controversial and difficult to recommend, but undeniably important in film history. 12. SS Experiment Camp, 1976. Sergio Garone's film belongs to the Italian Nazi exploitation cycle that directors churned out in the mid to late 1970s. It's basically a war film framework for depicting sadistic torture and degradation in a concentration camp setting. The film is graphically brutal and completely without nuance or artistic justification. There's no attempt to understand or critique the horror shown. It's just exploitation of historical atrocity for entertainment and profit. What makes this remarkable is that the film got distributed internationally on VHS and home video. It appeared in rental stores everywhere. Parents could accidentally rent it, thinking it was a legitimate war film. That sparked massive protests in the UK. Video stores had to remove it from shelves. Go Video ran ads showing graphic imagery that led to public outrage. The British government cracked down hard on Nazi exploitation films. They labeled them Nazi nasties and essentially made them illegal during the video panic of the 1980s. Garone didn't care about artistic justification whatsoever. He was making a quick cash-in on a profitable subgenre. The film cost almost nothing to make. It made significant money before getting yanked by authorities. It remains one of the most offensive examples of cinema exploiting historical trauma. Even by exploitation standards, this cycle is considered beyond the pale entirely. The fact that these were widely available in rental stores across Europe is genuinely troubling historically. They normalize the sexualization of historical atrocity. So, there you have it, 12 Italian exploitation films that got absolutely demolished by censors and rating boards around the entire world in the most brutal fashion. But here's the real question. Nobody asks themselves, did censorship kill exploitation cinema completely, or did it actually save it from becoming even more extreme? Think about it carefully and honestly. These films are legendary specifically because they were banned and controversial. If they'd been released completely uncut without any resistance from authorities and watchdog groups, would anyone still care about them today? Would they have become cultural artifacts if they'd been freely available without restriction? Comment down below and tell us which of these films you think crossed a definite line that shouldn't be crossed, or if you think all of them deserve to be shown completely uncut without any cuts whatsoever. And tell us, what exploitation film do you think is so extreme that it should still be banned today? What's the most disturbing film you think exists? What film do you think went too far?